Welcome to the Slay Your Day Show with Avi Vatsa. Welcome back to the Slay the Day Show with Avi V. And today we're going to talk about the power of personal branding with the legend Jeremy Ryan Slate. It's my absolute honor to introduce you to the man who inspired me to start my own podcast, Jeremy Ryan Slate. Jeremy is the founder of the Create Your Own Life podcast, which studies the highest performers in the world. He studied literature at Oxford University and is a former champion power lifter turned new media entrepreneur. He specializes in using podcasting and new media to create trust and thought leadership. His podcast ranked number one in iTunes in the business category and hit several top 100 charts. He was named one of the top 26 podcasts for entrepreneurs to listen to by CIO Magazine, the top podcast to listen to by Inc. Magazine, and the millennial influencer to follow by BuzzFeed. That's pretty awesome. The Create Your Own Life podcast has been downloaded over 2.5 million times. He's also a contributing editor of the New Theory magazine and Grit Daily. After his success in podcasting, Jeremy and his wife Brielle founded Command Your Brand Media to help leaders use the power of podcasts to change the world. Oh my God, it's such an honor to have you, man. I'm actually very nervous because I'm interviewing the God himself.
Hey, I'm just stoked to be here, man. And you know, like, first of all, like, shout out to you, because I know you've been doing, we hired you recently and you've been doing a lot of help for us with growing our YouTube channels. We just had our first video reach 100,000 views. So, like, yeah, I've been doing this a long time, man, but you know, you're doing really awesome in your own right, and we appreciate the ability that we're able to actually have you work for us too. So it's been cool, man.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's awesome working with you, and I'm very glad that you're here with us today, and our audience can learn a lot from you. So to get right into it, like, you have this amazing show. What inspired you to start your own podcast?
So I've listened to podcasts since like '07 or '08. Like, I had this college professor, Dr. Sean Lake, who I'm actually still friends with, by the way. He lives down in Tampa. I went and visited him last time I was down there. And yeah, he was one of my professors at Seton Hall. And I heard this, it sounded like a morning show one day playing in his office. And I'm like, what are you listening to? He's like, oh, it's a podcast. And the podcast was called The No Agenda Show, hosted by Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak, which I actually still listen to this day. They're like 1,500 episodes in. And that's how I was introduced to podcasting. It was actually by a college professor. And I ended up really, really liking it. And you know, I went through kind of my college career and got my master's degree and you know, ended up teaching at a school for a couple of years, and I just wasn't super happy doing it. So I went through, my mom had a stroke in 2012, and it made me kind of look at a lot of what I'm doing and like, do I want to do this? So I went through like numerous different things, man, like network marketing, selling life insurance, in-home personal training. I tried everything, and like none of it really worked. So I actually started working at a friend's marketing firm. I had taught myself how to write CSS and HTML from like reading blogs and watching YouTube videos. So I did some, you know, basic web design stuff, and I started working for this marketing company, and I started a podcast just really as an outlet, because it's like, you know, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, but, you know, I guess kind of like, where's the long term of this? And we saw 10,000 listens in our first month, and it's kind of led to everything else I'm doing now.
Wow. I didn't even know podcasting been around since 2007.
Oh, it's been a lot longer than that, man. Like, so I listened to, I mentioned that podcast, the No Agenda Show with Adam Curry, that I've been listening to since '07. So he's actually the first podcaster. He started podcasting back in 2004 with a guy named Dave Weiner, and they took old blog RSS feeds and figured out how they could attach audio to it. And then Steve Jobs is like, hey, can we have that? And that's actually where the idea for podcasting came from.
Oh, wow. All right. I didn't know that. And so you said you were a teacher, and at some point you were a power lifter too?
So I've always done that. That's always been like a personal thing I've done. So I was a wrestler in school. Which means you don't really take great care of yourself. You eat very little. Sometimes you throw up to make weight, whatever you got to do. And for me, fitness just kind of became this thing where I started taking better care of myself. And I've realized that, like, genetically, I'm, you know, able to gain muscle a lot easier than a lot of people, just how I'm physically built. So I ended up getting into powerlifting just like as, you know, as a fun thing. And I started doing competitions, and I pulled an army tank, and I did all sorts of stuff. So like, it wasn't a career for me. It was just kind of something else I did in addition to. But it really, kind of helped me in getting myself out there.
Wow, that's awesome. And so then, did you feel like nervous or like insecure leaving your job, as a teacher and then starting out on your own and doing this podcast? Because I don't know if there's a lot of money to be made in this business.
Um, because it's interesting. If I had tried doing podcasting, I think right out of school, I would have been a little bit more nervous. But like I had this really big reality check because when I got out of school in 2011, the economy wasn't great, which is funny because you look at it now and I think our dollar's like worth 25% less than it was in 2011. But that's neither here nor there. So I couldn't get a job, and I actually ended up during the day working with an old school painter, painting houses from 7 a.m. until 5, which means when I say old school, like you did everything by hand. You hand scrape, you hand paint, 4-inch brush. Like, dude, this was the hardest thing I ever did. 4-foot wooden ladders, which you can't imagine how heavy those are, or 40-foot wooden ladders. So it was wild. And at night, I was the nighttime manager at the gym from 7 p.m. until like 11. So like I was sleeping very little. I was working a lot, and I kind of had learned the value of hard work, right? And then I went into the teaching career. I came out and did all these different businesses that didn't work. So I think for me, I'd kind of failed so much. It was kind of like, what's the worst that can happen? So I was willing to just kind of try something.
Wow. And you were newly married at that time, right?
So I actually started the podcast right after I was married. Yeah. So I got married in September of 2015. I started the podcast in November 20th of 2015. And funny enough, and I don't talk about this a lot, is I actually had started a podcast before that, and it was called Rock Your Life. And it was really bad. I started it in the middle of 2014. We did it for like a month, and like I had like no listeners. There was no microphones. There was no like structure. It was really bad. So I had this like experience of I'd at least tried it, given it up and quit it like I had with all those previous things, right? I was really good at quitting things at that point in my life. And I was newly married, and I decided like, what am I going to do? I'm working at this marketing firm. I'm making some money, but it's not like a future. And I started a podcast because I'm like, all right, well, let's just get it out there. Let's figure it out. And my getting it out there and figuring it out is actually what helped me create everything.
Wow. That's intense. Yeah. All right. And so, and obviously, fast forward like 7 years now, and now you're like a huge brand and you're helping other people build their brands as well with your command your brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does personal branding relate to like what you do with podcasting?
Well, the thing I want to preface that with something too, because I think the thing that we're seeing changing a lot is, you're still always going to have your big brands. Like you're always going to have those like your Amazons and things like that. But the thing that I think you notice if you look at the landscape is there's a lot less of those big recognizable brands. And the reason being is because the internet and the ability to connect with people has made it so brands are much more connected to the person and the identity. And I think that's the thing you're going to see even with companies, right? We're seeing companies, people know about VaynerMedia because they know who Gary Vaynerchuk is. People know about, Grant Cardone's real estate business and his books because they know who he is. So I think we're really seeing kind of in this modern world now, how because the ability to reach people and the ability to connect with people is meaning that like businesses are much more personified. They know a business because they know a person. So personal branding now is more valuable than anything. And the thing about that as well is building a personal brand. Also, you're building an asset that you can put behind anything else you're doing, right? You're working at a business now. Maybe that business doesn't go well. Maybe it does, and you sell it, you move on to the next one. But what you've built in terms of what you talk about, how people see you, everything like that, you can put that behind whatever next project you do. So we really are in a huge personal branding world right now. And I'm not going to say the big days of big brands are over. I don't think that's 100% true because, there will always be venture capitalists putting money into things and things like that. But at the same time, I think the brands that are smart are really going off personas. And I know, like you mentioned, for how we see that with podcasting, we're even seeing a lot of big brands. I can't really use names and things because they make you sign NDAs. But at the same time, like we're seeing a lot of big brands saying like, we've been in existence for a really long time, but we're finding people don't know us on a personal level. So, we're getting the founder story out there. We're getting the CEO story out there. We're getting, maybe somebody that's had an incredible experience of what they do out there. So it's really allowing people to get to know people on a much more human level. And that's really how podcasting comes into this. Podcasting comes into this because it's what we're doing now, right? It's a long form conversation, which you can't do on TV. You can't do on radio because if you get 10 minutes, like that's a lot. So you don't really get to know somebody in that period of time. And that's what's really different about the podcasting world is, it's a personal brand that you really get to know somebody personally. And I think that's just really important here.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, even Apple for that matter. I mean, Steve Jobs was the force driving it, right? We all know Steve Jobs, right? So
Yes.
I think big brands can also use the personal branding. But then can you clarify a little bit like
Yeah.
what is personal branding and how do you guys approach it, and or how would you suggest anyone to approach it?
So personal branding is how people perceive you as a person, and it's thinking of yourself as a brand. Like, what do you stand for? How are you seen? How are you visually seen? What's your position? There's a really great book by Al Rees called "Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind." Al Rees and Jack Trout have written some great books throughout the years, but it's called "Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind." Like, how are you positioned? Positioning is what you're seen for or against. That's why when I hate when people use it, but it's they're trying to do positioning. They say we're the Uber of blank. So position. So when you're thinking of a personal brand, you're thinking of how as a person, what am I seen for or against? What am I seen positioned for or against? What do I believe in? And how am I visually seen? Because the visual aspects are, we see with Instagram and we see with things like that is very, very important. So what we're trying to do in terms of how we're getting people out there is we're trying to get people to get known as a person, right? Creating that know, like, and trust factor as a person. Because when you create that, people are much more receptive to your messages, what you have to say, what you have to teach. So they're much more willing to receive what the brand is promoting and talking about. So that's kind of where I see it come in, as the storytelling aspect is really, really important, right? Because stories are something very innately human. You think about, the Homeric epics, right? The Iliad and the Odyssey. Here's the interesting part. Homer was considered to be this blind bard, right? Bard meaning somebody who was a poet that would sing things. He wouldn't speak them. So nothing he did was written down. And it was just kind of passed down and passed down and passed down. And we find now, as historians, that Homer was actually probably three people, because one person wrote it, told it for a really long time, it got passed around. Somebody else embellished it, added to it, it got passed around. So stories are very uniquely human, and they communicate to us on a very spiritual level. And I think that's what's really interesting when you're marrying the idea of personal branding and communication. You're really communicating to people at a higher level that your kind of marketing campaigns and things just can't really do.
Wow, that's so true,
Yeah, I
man.
kind of got in the weeds on that one, man, but it happens.
No, that's great. Oh, so you help people basically. You're saying that we should like approach branding with like storytelling.
Yes, 100%. It's branding is all about stories, because the thing you want to think about is, you know, facts tell and stories sell, right? Like, okay, we did this much, we did blah. Now, here's the thing: we are in an era of fake news where people like try to facts still matter. Like, definitely facts still matter. But the point is, like, people can connect with stories and they can connect with narratives, and because of that, they're much more apt to, like, I don't want to say you're like, trying to trick people here, because you're not, but you're making them much more receptive to hearing what you have to talk about, rather than, oh my gosh,
Right.
is this where the PowerPoint comes out and you tell me, like, like the ratio of subscribers you have and what your monthly recurring revenue is. And when really it's like, we started this company because we realize, as people, we're very finite, right? There's only so much we can do. But if I find other people with really big messages and I get them out there, that's incredible. And that's why I do this each and every day. Like, it's a short story, but stories are things people can connect with. Like, yeah, I like that. I want to do that. And I think that's what you really have to look at it as.
That's huge. That's powerful, actually. That's awesome, man. And so obviously in your podcast, you've interviewed almost like over 1,000 people, I think, right? Well,
Well, yeah, I think I've done over 1,000 interviews, but I don't think we're at 1,000 episodes, because we've done like ones here or there that don't count and stuff like that, but somewhere around there.
right. And so which one's your favorite one?
It's like asking me which one of my kids do I like more, man. That's really hard. You know what I mean? Like, um, because there's been like some cool experiences. Like, I got to interview Jonathan Goldsmith a couple years ago, who you may know as the most interesting man in the world. Or I've gotten to interview, former CIA director David Petraeus. That was a really cool experience. Or I'm a huge auto racing fan. I interviewed four-time Indy 500 champion Elio Castroneves. Grant Cardone, best-selling author. So, like, it's so hard to pick, because I've had so many conversations like, oh my God, that was so cool. So it's hard to pick, man.
Wow. You've interviewed all of those people?
Yeah, I even, so I'm a big Yankees fan too. I even interviewed uh you know Nick Swisher, who was my favorite player when he played with the Yankees, or I interviewed Johnny Damon, he's one of only 5 people to win a World Series, both with the Yankees and with the Red Sox. NFL Hall of Famer with the Eagles, Brian Dawkins. Like, I've just been very lucky and very blessed to have a lot of incredible conversations, man.
That's crazy. I mean, okay, I can see how hard it would be to choose.
Which is funny now, because the thing that you got my wheels turning now, because we've been talking about, like, on my podcast, like you've been telling me, like, man, you need to do shorter clips, like 4 minutes, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, shoot, man, we've done video of all those episodes, but I don't have 4-minute clips. I think I really should. So now you've got me thinking about it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was also one of the reasons I asked, but I think you could do 4-minute clips of all of them. Yeah.
I really should be, like, I think it, because the one of the big things that you and I have been talking about, like, because you were saying, like, YouTube's a really important area to get your stuff out there. And you're saying, like, long clips are great, but if you're trying to get, like, more watch hours, you really want, like, shorter, more concise clips. Like you were saying, like 4 minutes is, like, really good. And I'm realizing, that's something we haven't done as much of. And I think creating more of that's going to make our content, more able to be received, because at the same time, it's what we've been talking about here. It's stories, right? It's short stories people can connect with, which I think to me is why it would connect more.
Exactly. And that's for YouTube for sure, right? But also, I have a personal question, and I think a lot of the listeners have it. Do people actually sit down and listen for to long form content for like hours?
So here's the thing I'll say, and I'll go from the way I've talked to listeners, and I'll go for the way that I do it. First answer is yes. But it's usually not on video. And I think that's what's interesting as well. Like, if I'm listening to, like, I may find it through video, right? And I may see that thing through video and be like, oh, that's interesting, or that's a cool short, which makes sense for what we've been talking about here. But at the same time, like, I'm a big fan of the Hardcore History podcast. Dan Carlin's episodes, anywhere from 3 to 5 hours. And he only does one. He doesn't have a publishing schedule. Just like, once every like 3 to 8 months, you'll see something pop up and be like, oh, cool, Dan did another episode. Or, the Joe Rogan Experience. I've listened to a lot of Joe Rogan's episodes, and he does video, but I don't watch the video because usually I'm doing something else. And I think that's when, with podcasting, you have to think about listener habits. Podcast listeners are usually people that are doing something else. And that's why, like, for me as a podcaster, and I've appreciated this, that you're kind of helping me to learn YouTube a little bit more, because it's a different medium. For podcasts, we're creating long form content, which is usually consumed in audio form. And, we've only been doing video for ourselves for the last year and a half. So, people listen to it when they're at the gym, when they're in the car, when they're doing whatever. And that's why we actually saw a lot of listening habits change through the pandemic. Because the big thing that was different was people weren't commuting. People were working in spaces with their families. So we saw a little bit of a dip in podcast listening initially, and it came back. But it's interesting because you have to think of what your listeners doing. They're usually not sitting there glued to a screen staring at it. That's what Netflix is for. But they're which I just watched a great series on Netflix, by the way, called It's called Inventing Anna.
Did you?
It was extremely interesting. I'm a big Shonda Rhimes fan. I found that extremely interesting. But anyway, podcast listeners are long form audio listeners. They're probably more akin to a radio listener, frankly. And I think that's why they will listen to something long form, but usually listen to it, not view it.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So then the short answer is yes. People do listen to long form content.
Oh yeah.
But like you said, video, YouTube,
and it's in clips too. Like, you know what I mean? Like, okay, I have that podcast playing. I'll pause it. I'll go do something else. I'll, listen to it tomorrow. Like, I listen to this one podcast every single morning. The one podcast I get up every morning is shout out to Tim Pool. I listen to the Timcast every morning, and I'll listen to it, in the half hour while I'm making and eating my breakfast. Then as I get in the car, it starts playing on the audio device in my car, and then I'm in the gym and it switches to my earbuds. And then I start working, and I may or may not finish the episode because then I start working. So, like, you have to think about the listener habits of what people are doing with long form content.
Right. Okay, cool. So, and then if like I'm starting out new, do you think is it never too late to start your own podcast, or is it like gone? The time's gone.
I think it's never too late if you're starting a good podcast, because there's like 3.5 million podcasts out there. And only 18% of those produce content on a bi-weekly basis. So that means you don't have a lot of people to compete with, especially if you're doing, number one, you're consistent, right? You're putting out a certain number of episodes, 1 to 2 every single week. And as well, like it's good content, because there's a
Mm.
lot of people out there that, and I think they're all like internet marketers at heart. They see like a format and they're like, all right, I'm gonna ask every person these same 7 questions, and then we're gonna get to the lightning round. And it's just like at a certain point, like it's not something people can buy into. People can buy into a great long form conversation. And it doesn't mean it has to be super researched and have crazy amount of questions and things like that, but it has to be real. And I think that's the difference. There's a lot of people that create these podcasts that are structured off the same questions they ask everybody, and because of that, it's not real communication. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of feels like fake, because it's like, all right, they know what's coming. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. And so you're saying 18% of them like
Yeah.
actually survive? That's out of 3.2 million.
Yeah. And
That's
when I started back in 2015, man, they were 240,000. So like there definitely is a lot more shows, but a lot of shows do what's called pod fading. It means they get to they never reach 20 episodes, and then kind of like there's a feed out there, but they don't publish anymore. So like if you can get past 20 episodes and you can do it consistently, you have a much better shot of kind of lasting out there.
right. And I've also noticed some of them there's no interviews, and some of them are like 3 to 5 minutes long as well.
Yeah. Well, because
So
it depends on how you want to deliver it, right? I find an interview podcast is easier, frankly, because you're having a conversation and somebody else is supplying a lot of the content. Like I have another podcast I do called The Forces of History,
really?
where I do long form content on history. And because of that, my episodes are far and few between, man. Like I'm right now in the midst of a 5-part series on Roman emperor worship. And, I've done the first and second parts, and that was in 2020. I haven't done the 3rd episode yet, because it takes so much work because you basically have to like pre-write these things. So when
Right.
people are looking at doing something that's 3 minutes, they're like, okay, I can create something myself and I can do it quickly. But there has to be a ton of value in that 3 minutes, or people aren't going to come back as well.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. On the topic of history, I love history, by the way. And I'm like, wow, you went to Oxford for history? That's big. What's your favorite history book right now?
Ermengarde of Narbonne and the World of the Troubadours. It's based on this woman. Her name was Lady Ermengarde. And it's funny because you ever see those like memes that are like, oh my God. Her name is spelt like that. So it's very funny every time I see that. And she was a very interesting character. So in the 1200s in France, it was this very, very interesting time period. They spoke a language called Occitan, which is a mix of French, Spanish, and Latin. And they were also like very like spiritually enlightened. They were kind of Christian, kind of into the god Apollo, kind of into some other stuff. So they were like, men and women were equal. Jews and Christians were equal. Like it was a very like cool society where people could do a lot of things.
When was what was the
It
time?
was in the 1200s. It was in the 1200s, and they kind of reached this like pinnacle of society in southern France, and in this Narbonne region of France, and the kind of corresponding area, Carcassonne, and things like that. And it was this very like interesting society, and because of that, like the production was growing, they were making money, things are going well, and there was still some normal things about that time period where a woman, once she married a man, no longer had power, right? That's just how it worked. So this woman, Ermengarde, realized, well, if I just act like I'm dating for a really long time, like until I die, I can rule a territory, because people always were in desire of her. But since she never got married, she never gave up her title. So it's a really, really interesting story about like political intrigue and things like that. And it's based on a true story. And that kind of part of France was only like that until about 1300, because those people were what was known as Cathars. And the Pope kind of rolls in around 1300 and says, you guys are threatening. I'm going to kill you all. And that's what's called the Albigensian Crusade, where the Pope comes in and he slaughters all the Cathars. And it was interesting because they had created kind of this thing where people are equal, and it was kind of rivaling the power of the papacy. So the Pope felt threatened by that. But anyway, that would be my favorite historical book.
That's huge. This is way before. Right?
I'm smarter than I look, man.
Well, you're one of the smartest people ever, and that's why your podcast they have depth.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. You really know your stuff. Yeah. So I was saying this is way before Voltaire, right? Like.
Oh yeah, no. This was Voltaire was in the 16 and 1700s,
Yeah.
and Ermengarde of Narbonne, she lived in the 1200s, and the Albigensian Crusade, where the Pope kind of rolls in and kills all the Cathars, which he killed like 1 million people, man, which is wild. It was around 1300. And not far after that too, and this kind of like came out of that whole area because this is when the Pope was living in France, under the Avignon papacy. So the King of France was kind of controlling the Pope at that point in time. So in 1307, Friday, October 13th, 1307 is when he actually kills all the Knights Templar, because he actually him and the king owed the Knights Templar a whole bunch of money. And they were like, oh, those guys are Cathars. Like, all those guys we just killed, we should kill those guys too. But it was just actually they owed him a whole bunch of money.
That's crazy. I guess that was the beginning of the Dark Ages in a way.
Well, it always kind of was dark, man. It took a long time for the light to come out, because it was the Enlightenment the Renaissance didn't happen until the 1500s. So we had darkness for quite a while, man. Dark Ages is actually refers to the time period which is right after the fall of Rome, which is 476 to between the kind of rise of the Renaissance, which was like 15 something. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head. Which is interesting because you have in the whole eastern part of the world until 1453 is when the whole Eastern Roman Empire, known as it was kind of still going during that whole time period. But it's when the Western Roman Empire fell. That's known as the Dark Ages.
Oh wow, you're too smart, man. I think we went off on a tangent.
Yeah, you pulled me there, man. You definitely pulled me there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You asked me about a history book, and now I can't shut up.
All right. Okay, cool. So what would be your biggest advice for someone starting a podcast then?
I would say, like, number one, be willing to be in this for a year, because a lot of people, like, they don't have the right expectations going into it. They think they're going to start something, become extremely famous in a couple weeks, and the magical internet money is just kind of rolling in. When it's really about being willing to be in this for a minimum of a year, build an audience. And you have to think about, like, with the content I'm creating, who does it have value for? Not just for me. So it has to be value for the person listening to it. And frankly, it has to be listenable, meaning I think like having, you don't have to be like crazy, have a studio mic like this, but like have audio that's easily listenable. It's just really, really important, because you have to think about your podcast listener. The only thing they're really getting is audio. So if they don't have great audio and that's how they experience you, that's going to be really tough. It's much easier to have not great audio and do video, because people have another modality they're getting you on. So I would say be willing to be this in for a year, create content valuable to the end listener, and create something that's listenable.
Awesome. And a lot of people ask me, hey, I'll start my podcast and get rich. Do you actually get rich making a podcast?
No, but you're helping me with that. No, but like I think the thing I always tell people is, it should be kind of this front end to your business, right? Where people experience you, create trust, and do everything else. But I don't think a podcast can be a business in itself. We're kind of in the process with your help of kind of turning that around and turning the podcast itself into a media company. But I think really a podcast for most people is kind of a storefront for everything else you're doing. I don't think it's a business in itself.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's you can get a lot of views and branding, but you may not get immediate money from the podcast itself. You could get more clients that way, I guess.
No, you definitely can, because people are going to know you, like you, and trust you, and they spent so much time with you. They're also going to tell other people about you. And I think that's the valuable thing people don't think of, is they're going to tell other people about you.
Awesome. Cool, man. And so what do you think from your experience? What is the future of podcasting right now?
I think the future of it is really just how people experience it. And I think that's the thing we're seeing now, is we're kind of seeing YouTube shows become podcasts and podcasts become YouTube shows. And we're seeing, I think we're going to start to see how like VR and stuff goes into this, and, the metaverse, which kind of freaks me out a little bit, but like we're seeing, because I know, like my friend Zuby just did one of the first live performances in the metaverse, which is interesting. So I think we're starting to see kind of the next time where this is going. And here's the thing too, is we've talked about like podcasters making money. There's a thing called podcasting 2.0 that Adam Curry, the first podcaster I talked about there, started a couple years ago. And basically what they've done is they've tied blockchain into these podcast feeds. And if you listen on a podcasting 2.0 device, you can actually give crypto to the person you're listening to as like a donation, which is kind of cool. So I think that's one of the things we're going to start seeing as well, is where people get paid for good content, and they get paid like not in traditional funds, but like on the blockchain, which I think is cool too.
That's huge. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
like
Well, because he started podcasting 2.0 because he's afraid of people getting canceled. Like, like Alex Jones, love him or hate him, I think 90% of what he says is bunk, but he should be allowed to say it if he wants to say it. And we've seen people getting canceled in a lot of these areas. So that's why Adam actually created Podcasting 2.0, was to make something not cancelable. And he's like, well, shoot, creators should make money too.
Right. That's huge. And how do you get this Podcasting 2.0?
I think he said the website is, I think it's newpodcastapps.com. I think is what it is. But if you just Googled Podcasting 2.0 Adam Curry, he's wrote a bunch of stuff about it.
Awesome. All right, cool. And then I think the last time we were speaking, you mentioned that you're coming out with your own book really soon.
Yeah, so we have a book coming out on the 21st of June called Unremarkable to Extraordinary, because I think we all essentially start unremarkable. It's the things we do and how we carry ourselves that make us extraordinary. And these are the things I've learned from the lots of conversations I've had with high-level, incredible people, because I think there's a lot of false data out there, man. I think there's a lot of people that have this idea of like, find something you love and never work a day in your life. And, for some people that may be true, but I find finding what you love and being successful at it takes a lot of hard work, takes consistency. Sometimes it takes years. And, at the same time, you can't care what other people think, because then you're kind of living your life for people that aren't going to die for you anyway. So what's the point? So these come from a lot of conversations I've had and what these people have done to be successful. I'm really trying to break the false data on how people reach success.
Wow. So is it like the interviews that you've done, and
we've taken them and turned them into narrative, because like I didn't want to produce the book that was just like Jeremy said, guest said, Jeremy said, guest said. It's really based on the stories, the learning points, and it brings in a lot of like these historical facts that I have and things that I've studied and things like that. So it's this really cool kind of synthesis of like my mind that always wins Jeopardy in the privacy of my own home, and then what I've learned from like all these people I've talked to.
Wow. I love the name and I love the idea. It's huge.
Thank you.
For sure. It's going to be available on Amazon, right?
So it's going to be available all over the place. And if people actually go to getextraordinarybook.com, there's all the places you can pre-order. And actually, if you bring us back your receipt or your order number, there is a free offer on there to get the audiobook free, as well as our 30 Days of Extraordinary workbook. So you just got to, basically purchase the book, bring us back the receipt, and you can get those things as soon as they release.
That's awesome. All right. I'm super excited for this. And so we're kind of at the end of the show today. So tell us, if someone wants to like help reach out to you or get your help in personal branding or podcasting, how can they reach out to you?
So they can check us out over at commandyourbrand.com, and we'll be glad to have a conversation with them and see how we can help them.
Awesome. That's commandyourbrand.com.
Yes, sir. Or .media. Both will get you there.
Perfect. All right. Dude, this was the best conversation I've had so far. You're an amazing guy. Every time I talk to you, I learn more about you. My respect to you. You're the boss.
Hey, brother, I appreciate you having me, man. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for taking out the time, and you have a good one.
Welcome to the Slay Your Day Show with Avi Vatsa.